you didn't feel that you needed to change the system. You wanted to improve it incrementally. You were patient in doing it. And most importantly, that you saw it as a public responsibility. Why did you feel that it was a public responsibility?
If you look at the Straits Times, you see that it is a prosperous newspaper. And one of the reasons for its prosperity is Singapore's prosperity. Now, if Singapore is not as prosperous as it has been for the last 30, 40 years, I think the Straits Times will not get the kind of advertising support that it needs. And don't devalue the importance of a financially sound newspaper. Now, it is in the interest of the Straits Times to help create the conditions that will enable Singapore to prosper. Because the Straits Times benefits from Singapore's prosperity. There is a connection, there is a virtuous circle, which I think it is in the interest of the Straits Times to preserve, to protect. Because the more revenue you get, the more you're able to invest heavily in resources that will help produce a better newspaper. So I see a very deep connection between the health of the Straits Times and the health of the Singapore economy. And so that's one. I believe that in the process of doing so, you're also serving the readers, because the readers must benefit if they live in a community that is prosperous and stable and harmonious. So public duty in that sense. But public duty also because it is in your own self-interest to do so. What is the other question?
Okay, I will leave you all to ask the follow-up questions.
No, but you mentioned something which I need to respond to. Yes.
I forgot my own question. I'm sorry. I thought you answered it pretty well. So although I have follow-up questions, but yeah.
Why I was quite confident that the
incremental change.
Not so much the incremental change. The heavy hand, if you like, of the government over time will become less heavy-handed. I do not, for example, see this government resorting to the Internal Security Act to act against journalists, as they did in the early years of my career. Right? I mean, some of the journalists were arrested. I don't see that happening in today's Singapore. And I don't see the Straits Times or any mainstream paper doing something so foolish as to risk detention. On the other hand, although the government has got enormous powers to regulate the press, I don't see them closing down the newspaper either. Not in today's Singapore. So, what avenues are open to the government, to exert its will on the media? Well, as I said, one favorite instrument is to effect a change of editorial leadership. But I believe that over time this will become less and less effective. How often can you keep doing it? And let's say you do it. Let's say you do it. You do what we call a government team of officials operation. Bring in a team of people to run the paper. I think it is not possible, for that team to be able to operate in a way that will, on the one hand, make the government happy, and on the other, protect the integrity and the credibility of the newspaper. I think it is not possible. And that's my view. Unless there are so many people, so many able journalists out there, who could be shipped in and out of a newspaper like the Straits Times.
I mean, like you said in the book, Lim Kim Sam admitted to you that he would not be able to run the newsroom after sitting in every day for a while.
That's because he's a businessman. He's not really a journalist, yeah. But I sincerely believe that it's very difficult, to ship in a bunch of guys and get that person or that bunch of people to do it. Because you also need to worry about the credibility of your newspaper.
To what extent did technology, i.e. social media, to political awakening at the grassroots level, 3, political enlightenment at the top, at the political leadership. To what extent did all these 3 factors help you manage this broadening of the OB markers, which resulted in the special media environment, which resulted in the special newspaper that you manage over the years?
I take it, Victor, this is not a multiple choice question, right? He's got to go through each one of those, right? Okay.
Because I think to some extent, I've always been curious. Was it the push? Which are the push factors, or was it this? It cannot be a sudden awakening at the top. That's the realization that they should really loosen up, widen the OB markers, increase the leeway in the fairways.
I think the most important factor really is the acceptance, however reluctantly, on the part of the government that they have to change. You cannot manage Singapore the way it has been managed 30, 40 years ago. Just to give you a small little example, in 2007-08, I was involved with a committee that the government set up called the New Media Advisory Committee, where our job was to suggest to government how to deal with issues arising from the advent of new media. And one of our recommendations in that report was to lift the gag on civil servants so that they can take part in discussions on matters of interest to the community. When that recommendation was put forward in the report, one PermSec friend of mine told me that although he agreed with most of the recommendations in the report, he was totally opposed to the recommendation that civil servants should have the gag lifted. I was very happy to read in the newspapers a few days ago that the gag had been lifted. What does it show? It showed that the government also evolves with the times. They know that if they want to engage, they must try and remove as many restraints as possible so that there could be more intensive discussions. So I think the need for the government to tweak its style of management of the media is something that is ongoing, and they will continue to do it to keep pace with changes in the political situation in Singapore. And of course, you're right, Victor, that the new media has an important part to play in this broadening of the fairways. Like it or not, the digital world is upon us. More people are using the internet, mobile devices, and they are talking about national issues online, not just offline. So I see that trend accelerating, and you can see the government becoming more and more active in using the digital platform to reach out to their voters. Soon after the last GE, the Minister for National Development, Koh Boon Wan, started a blog, which he now uses very frequently to reach out to his voters. So you're right, the new media is an important consideration for the government in how it manages media in Singapore, both online as well as offline. And that's also one of the reasons for my optimism that as technology changes, the old ways of managing the media will also have to change. And it has changed.
When did you suddenly realize that the knuckle duster era has ended? If I can use your golf analogy, you're playing an 18-hole game. At which hole number did you realize the fairways were open, wider? You know what I mean?
If I know my golf, every fairway is narrow.
Some are narrower, some are wider.
Yeah. For me, with my handicap, everyone is narrow. But Pat has a handicap now of 15.8, so every fairway is very broad. But seriously, I hazard a guess. I cannot be absolutely I cannot absolutely say that this is actually what actually was the turning point. But I'll venture a guess, and my guess is that this was shortly after the general election. I believe is 1987 or 1988, thereabouts, after the general election. The first Prime Minister decided that he is going to very actively engage people from our newsroom. And I could sense that it was an attempt on his part to reach out, develop a much more constructive relationship with us. And the interactions intensified thereafter. As I tried to say it in the book, of all the prime ministers that the press had to work with, 3, he was the one who put in the greatest effort to reach out to the press. Not only through dialogues, but on important issues. We would receive a lot of reading material. I think this is his way of trying to educate us. One example would be the phenomenon that suddenly emerged after 9/11, global terrorism. How does Singapore deal with this security issue, and what is the nature of this beast? We got an enormous amount of literature from him to try and help us understand, what is the nature of this problem. So I may be completely wrong in my reading of the situation, but I read that as an attempt to engage us in a much more constructive way. I believe he's very well aware of the fact that the political conditions in Singapore are changing, and the old ways of managing the media are no longer relevant, and he has to adapt and update his style of management. That I think was one turning point, but as I said, it is pure guesswork on my part.